Guys, today a Kinich video, the second Nathan character to get teased after Mulani, which I made a video on yesterday. Let's go. So, as you probably already know, Kinich is a Dendro character, specifically a Claymore 5-star Dendro. He's a main DPS, and I gotta say, despite Dendro being an element that we got a lot of characters off at this point, Kinich doesn't have a lot of competition in his role. However, the toughest competition he's facing, namely Alhaitham, is a quite great Dendro all-rounder in today's meta still. But even then, Kinich manages to be a carry that shines in a completely different ways compared to Alhaitham, to the point that neither of them might ever be considered the alternative of the other. So, for starters, Kinich's bread and butter is his elemental skill, which makes him enter a special stance for 10 seconds where he gets to use a grappling hook to fight. If an opponent is in range, the hook will grapple him and allow Kinich to physically rotate around him while also being able to attack. How cool is that? It's a totally innovative style of play that, other than just looking fun, also comes with practical advantages from how I see it, specifically Kinich becoming more elusive by playing this way. During this stance, he gets to use two types of attacks. The main ones are his normal attacks, which are small pistol-like shots that will hit the opponent twice for every hit. They deal quite nice damage, which by the way is counted as elemental skill damage, but by themselves they're hardly the main part of his kit. The more interesting part is the side effect they have. In fact, each of his normal attacks will generate 3 points for his special point bar, which he gets during the elemental skill duration. This bar can store up to 20 points, and they can be gained in 3 different ways. First, 3 for each normal attack as I just mentioned. Second, for every burning or burgeon proc, he will gain 7 points with a cooldown of 0.8 seconds. This last part traces the first difference compared to Alhaitham, as it indicates Kinich specializes in teams where the former isn't usually used in. Third and last, he will get 2 points for each second that passes during his elemental skill. So, throughout its 10 seconds duration, he will get 20 points this way. Every time he gets to the 20 points total, he gets to use a special attack, a cannonball equivalent, which is one of the highest non-elemental burst multipliers in the whole game. Compared to his normal attacks, they're definitely a highlight and ultimately the main part of his kit. So, his rotations are basically a game of rotating around opponents and using normal attacks until you're finally able to use the cannon attacks. Luckily for him, the burning and burgeon reactions give quite a lot of points, and based on the footage I've seen, on burning teams he should be able to trigger a cannon shot after every 2 normal attacks in terms of timing. Burgeon might be trickier, as it's something that is more strictly tied to multiple team application factors. It's very likely that his cannon hit frequency gets lower on Burgeon teams compared to burning teams in my opinion. Furthermore, Kinich's second passive makes his cannon hits get additional multipliers if you just hit the opponents during the elemental skill duration. It gets up to 2 stacks, and at that point the cannonballs become a great elemental burst equivalent for Kinich. But from what I've heard, there is a cooldown tied to the stack generation, so I don't currently know how consistent this passive is. Anyway, not only the cannonball's hit frequency being so strictly tied to burgeon and burning kind of penalizes the eventuality of Kinich potentially fitting on quicken teams, but the fact they have such high multipliers just makes them benefit more from attack buffs like Bennett's or Pyro Resonance compared to quicken buffs. The two things can kind of coexist, like on quick burn teams for example, but in these scenarios burning may not be super consistent, so I'm not confident in considering it a great option yet. Moving on, the last part of his kit is his elemental burst, which might not be complex in effects, but it's definitely flashy in terms of aesthetics. The burst turns Kinich's companion, the self-proclaimed Dragon Lord Ajax, into an actually looking giant Dragon Lord. In this form, it will deal some initial damage and then shoot lasers from the sky every 3 seconds or so. These lasers hit in an AoE horizontal range, and overall they contribute nicely to Kinich's damage. Still, the burst has a 70 energy cost, a quite steep requirement which might make it better as an every other rotation thing rather than a consistent damage tool if you don't use a good second Dendro particle generator with Kinich. Low-key, a true shame for such a cool animation. Taking all of these things in consideration, Kinich's personal damage output is honestly up there and maybe even better than any other Dendro DPS in the game, which however isn't really saying much. You see, Dendro characters like Alhaitham aren't typically known for their super high personal damage output, as they're meant to be used on quicken teams, so compositions where the ceiling damage of each specific character is reduced on purpose by design because of how team-wide the quicken damage is. The nature of quicken, which makes it an elemental reaction everybody on the team can consistently proc, makes quicken weekend teams more likely to be a team-wide effort compared to Kinich's teams, where the main DPS output technically needs to shine a bit more. There are a few exceptions to this with a couple specific teammates, but first I want to remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. So before I talk about his potential teams, a few more words on his gameplay. His AoE range seems quite limited, honestly. The idea that he locks into an opponent and rotates around him to deal damage is nice theoretically, but all of the hits will be directed at him and they don't seem to have nice AoE range. It seems that other opponents can be hit by the cannonballs if they stay close enough to the main one, but otherwise no. Meanwhile, the elemental burst is quite nice in terms of horizontal range and will provide some upside in that sense, but its damage is sadly minor compared to the cannonballs. This is made worse by the fact that since he's a Dendro character, he won't be teamed up with characters like Calcs that can group opponents, so I fear this will be a real issue for him. In his favor, however, the fact that he can move around the opponent so much while attacking makes him able to dodge about every enemy attack, meaning he should be able to be used consistently without a shielder, hopefully. Also, the fact that he just moves in a circle is pretty funny because of how it synergizes with Bennett's burst in terms of positioning. So now, teams-wise, as you probably got from my explanation earlier, Burgeon and Burning teams are the focus. I want to talk about Burning teams here mostly, because they're being easier to calc in terms of elemental reactions counting, as we don't clearly know Kinich's application yet. This whole idea of using Kinich in this context makes it pretty obvious that it will synergize well with another Dendro character that is about to come out and does well in Burning teams. So Emily, it never ever happened that I will talk about a next version character that deeply ties himself to a current version character that has yet to come out, but here we are, I guess. Emily is great for Burning teams for two reasons mainly. First, she's the only Dendro character besides Kinich that is able to deal great damage to burning opponents, and second, she drastically reduces the damage the active character takes by burning. For this early calc, Bennett is of course the staple buffer here, and you can use characters like Shenling, Deya, Toma and so on as the main pyro appliers of the team. The presence of a second Dendro character benefits both Emily and Kinich, as it lowers the energy requirements of both and also makes the Dendro application more consistent. In solo Dendro teams, since her application is not amazing, Emily has some issues getting the full buffs and passive effects out of her kit, but with Kinich she won't have this problem. Seeing this, the worry I'm sure most of you might have is that Kinich isn't that good without Emily, but the situation isn't really that tragic. For starters, even though Emily makes Burning teams more durable through her passive, Kinich won't be in contact with opponents much thanks to how mobile his playstyle makes him, so he might not need that. Second, Burning teams are quite flexible in possible structures and you can create alternatives with other meta staples like Furina. This is pretty much a Furina front vape team, where Pyro is basically always applied on the opponents and Furina gets to trigger vape every time her pets apply Hydro. These vapes, however, might make the burning triggers slightly more inconsistent than on the full Dendro Pyro teams, so for this scenario I'm counting one less cannon hit compared to the other team. Still, seems pretty nice in terms of damage. Lastly, I tried to check a Burgeon teams, but I'm not completely confident in this before I see it in practice and can fact check the rotation and Burgeon counts. It looks decent with medium assumptions, and the main difference compared to other Burgeon teams is that the main Dendro carry is dealing a lot of damage here. As a result, there is a lot of value in bringing Bennett to buff him, and since he also makes the comp much more durable through healing, that's a nice plus. For all of these teams, I use the new Natran craftable, which increases his elemental skill damage bonus every time the team triggers a pyro reaction, so it's a handmade option that will likely be his best free-to-play weapon. Overall, I would say Kinich is decent as of right now. Yesterday, I talked about how Mulanni can be a ceiling raiser for Genshin in terms of damage if every single star in the sky aligns for her. In comparison, Kinich is definitely more human-like in terms of numbers, but his playstyle on the other hand has more quality of life compared to Mulanni. So it's kind of hard at this young stage to say how they will compare to each other at full release. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe and go check the Mulanni guide I made yesterday. Bye bye.